Channel 11 presents Talk It Over. Here's your host, Ellen Adelstein.
Good evening. This evening we're going to be discussing a subject that's rather an unknown subject to many of us, and yet one that seems confusing, complicated, mystifying. We're going to discuss homosexuality, but we're going to discuss it on a personal basis. My guest tonight is Rick Wilson, who will share some of his experiences and feelings finding out that he is gay and what it means to live in a straight world if you are gay. Rick is 29 years old, and he recently graduated from the University of Arizona with a bachelor's degree in Russian languages. He worked for 3.5 years in the naval security of our country. And welcome, Rick. Congratulations on completing your degree.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm real glad to be finished with that.
I bet. Rick, let me just start off by giving you a personal observation that I have made. If the subject of homosexuality or gay people comes up, I have found that men will just go flying right up to the ceiling. Perfectly reasonable, sensible men on other subjects will come out with the worst statements like queers and fags and yuck and, just really unbecoming remarks. And it seems to me that men tend to do that, to that degree, a lot more than women. Why do you think that's true?
Well, I think your observation is probably correct. My feeling on that is that our culture doesn't really foster male friendship, male caring or male loving. And
you mean in females as well as males? Excuse me, you mean male caring, fostering, loving of females and males?
Yes, but more specifically of males to males. We don't really allow ourselves the warmth between male friends in our culture that many cultures do. And so when men are confronted with other men who really do love other men, it's seen as very much of a threat to them, to their image of the American male. I think so.
You mean the macho, monkey business?
The macho, the in control, non-emotional male, yes.
Do you think that male homosexuality is more threatening to our society than female homosexuality?
I think it was, and I think it still is, but I think that is changing quite a bit with the women's liberation movement. One of the equalities that women are achieving is equal discrimination under the law. For so many years, for so many decades, lesbians were not even mentioned in legislation, in criminal codes. It was the men who were seen as the threat, as the criminal element. Now that homosexuality in general is being talked about and that more people are coming out, and with the women's liberation movement, lesbians are being now included in legislation and are being discriminated against more than they have been in the past. In the past, they were just ignored as women.
I wonder if part of that stems from the fact that some people get uptight about women's lib because they see that women will no longer need a man for support, that women can now get better jobs, education, opportunity, so on, and to carry that to the furthest extent that they therefore would no longer need men for sex.
I think that's a fear. I don't think it's a very realistic one, personally. I can't really address it from any other point of view other than my own. I think women do and are very lucky to have and to be building a kind of self-love of themselves and of other women that we have not allowed ourselves as men to develop. So I think that men are threatened, feel that perhaps women will come to love women exclusively and will leave men out in the cold, and I don't see that as a realistic fear. One
of the things that I've noticed about the women's liberation movement is the fact that a lot of people like to cloud the issue of women's equality by throwing in lesbianism and focusing on that as a primary concern rather than jobs and opportunity and education. etc.?
Certainly, and it's very easy to discount any kind of movement or any kind of argument if you can lump in a whole group of people that somebody somewhere will hate. There was an incident once of an American priest writing to a lesbian woman who was ordained. No, I take that back, to a woman who was ordained as a priest. And he called her a witch, a lesbian, a prostitute, and a communist. And so he could discount her validity as a priest by lumping in all of those things. And so by calling all women's libbers lesbians, that can be a very effective way of discounting any of those rights that the women are trying to achieve.
The whole movement?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Rick, I want to ask you some more personal questions. And we want to save some time so you can really get into this. So we'll be right back. Please join us. Rick, how did you find out you were a homosexual?
Well, with a great deal of difficulty and with no help from anyone. I grew up in a small town in West Texas, and no one talked about homosexuality except the typical fag jokes and the queer jokes. And I had, when I was growing up, one Life magazine article from June of 1964, I think it was, which purported to portray homosexuality in America. Of course, we were talking about women earlier. Women were not even mentioned in this entire article, and this was in 1964. So that's a good indication of the male point of view towards homosexuality as itself. This was the only information, real printed information I had until I got out of high school. And it was a very limited, of course, point of view. In fact, about the only two choices that the article gave me as what to be as a gay man was to be either a street hustler or to be a hairdresser. And so that was a very limited point of view for me, limited point of information for me to base my self-concept on. I did spend some time roaming around the streets trying to figure out what is a gay man, and went into the military and began to read books that I saw advertised and published. And it was through reading books that I bought in bookstores and things like that that I began to get a more broad perspective of who gay men were and what it was to be gay in America. I certainly, in fact, I really resent not having a better group of information to go on when I was younger. Which is one reason why I'm very involved in educational efforts as far as what it is to be gay. I don't see any reason why children growing up today should not have an informational basis to know something about homosexuality.
Speaking of your early education, let's start at the junior high level, or earlier if you wish. Do you think you felt any differently when puberty set in? At that time, that's usually the time where, little boys will not talk to little girls at the ages of 8 and 9, and little girls wouldn't be caught dead with little boys. Mm-hmm. And then comes puberty, and they start peeking.
Presto switcho.
Right, they start peeking out of the corner of their eye, and then pretty soon instead of peeking, they're just looking straight ahead. Mm-hmm. Can you trace anything back that far? When did you get your first inklings that perhaps you were gay?
Well, I didn't have any words for it, of course, until 1964. I didn't know what homosexual was. I knew what a faggot was. But from very early days, sandbox days, I felt somehow different. And in talking with my mother, she also, after talking with her at length, began to say, yes, I began to recognize something different very early. But of course, she didn't give me any name for it or give me any information. And I didn't have any. Junior high and high school were for me periods of frenetic activity, keeping very busy in all of the clubs in high school and all of the activities so that I wouldn't have to think about not dating or dating girls. I was always too busy, quote unquote, to go out on dates. And that was probably my saving grace in managing to survive those years without any real traumatic struggles.
Did you, I know, just a common question. I'm just going to ask you questions that have occurred to me, and I hope, obviously, you won't mind, or you wouldn't have agreed to do the show. Did you have any bad experiences dating women? I mean, a lot of people say, oh, well, they had a bad experience dating someone of the opposite sex, so that's what started.
No, I didn't. And I think that that's a myth that we hold about how people come to be homosexual. One of the myths about women is that a woman is raped or has a very bad experience with a man and immediately turns to homosexuality. I don't believe that homosexuality can be caused simply by that. I think it's a much more complex phenomenon. And no, I didn't have any negative experiences as a child. None at all that I can ever remember.
Did you date girls?
I did. Of course, you had the requisite senior prom, junior prom after the football games, dances, and had several close friends that enjoyed socializing with me. But we pretty much understood each other without ever saying anything, that it was merely a social relationship, and it was fine. And that also helped me get through high school. High school is one big closet for most people.
And then did you enlist in the Navy after that?
Yes, I did. I enlisted for the purpose of getting out of my hometown. I also wanted to learn Russian language, and I knew that the Navy had a very good Russian language department. So I spent 3.5 years in the Navy, in the Naval Security Group, as a Russian linguist. Interesting point of fact that I did have a top secret code word security clearance for probably 3 years, knowing full well that I was gay. Lying, of course, in order to get in and to get my security clearance, and did a marvelous job, if I have to say so. I was asked to re-enlist and promised all kinds of special benefits. But had I been openly gay, of course, I would have been an immediate security risk to the United States and denied my job and probably thrown out of the military.
Drummed out with great pomp and circumstance.
And efficient speed.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts about whether homosexuals are born homosexuals?
Yes, I have several thoughts, and you can never get any two gay people, and certainly any two non-gay people, to agree on whether gay people are born gay or not. I don't happen to feel that I was born gay. I also don't happen to feel that we are born necessarily heterosexual exclusively. I take a pretty much sociological viewpoint of how we get to where we are as adults, and that an infinite number of social factors and genetic factors combine to create either heterosexual or homosexual. And but then some of my closest friends believe quite firmly that they were born gay. We haven't discovered that yet.
Well, the reason that I asked you that question, with many gay people, for instance, when I met you, I would have never suspected that you were a homosexual, except that you came and addressed a meeting that I was at, and this was the reason that you were there.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have never guessed it by looking at you. But with a great many gay people, you can look at them and tell that there's a man, but that man looks a great deal like a woman. And if you try and say, well, is it because of the way he's dressed or does his hair, but you go beyond that, because the face and the hands and many things resemble a woman. And the same, of course, holds true with the female sex. There are a great many women that look like men besides their haircut and their dress.
But that doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, indicate their sexuality. And it would be very difficult, and I think probably impossible, to take a group of people who were mixed and to just go down the line and point out who is and who isn't just by the way they look. I think that's one of the mythologies that we hold about gay people, is that you can spot them by looking at them. But the people that we see in the media and in newspapers and books and movies are the very flamboyant, those of us with earrings, those of us that are political activists. But we don't see the corporation executives, we don't see the construction workers, we don't see the plumbers, we don't see the school teachers. So that we assume that we can tell who is and who is not either heterosexual or homosexual by their looks. I don't think that's possible.
Why do you wear an earring?
Well, my lover always wanted to have an earring, and he sort of admired pirates, and he wanted an earring, and we got a 2-for-1 special. I think that some of it was certainly probably a statement. Actually, I must say that sometimes I'm disappointed when people say, when I met you, I would not have been able to tell that you were gay. One of the reasons why I did get an earring is so that people would immediately think, that man might be gay because he has an earring in his ear. Because I think the invisibility of gay people is probably our worst enemy. And I want people to have to deal with me and with their fears of me as being a gay man. And so my earring, to that degree, is definitely a statement.
What portion of our population do you feel is gay?
That's a real difficult question to answer. There have been numerous studies from Kinsey's studies which his data collection has been questioned. All the way through, Bell just did one. One estimate which sort of combines the low and the high would be around 10%. That's simply a ballpark figure. It's pretty impossible until all gay people come out. Will we ever know what percentage of the population is? But one of the fears recently with the increased visibility of gay people and gay concerns is that homosexuality itself is increasing. I don't think that is a possibility or a phenomenon that is happening. I think simply our visibility and more people are coming out and talking about it is what's happening.
I see. Okay, I want to come back and talk to Rick about the reactions of his family, particularly his mother, when he announced that he was a homosexual. We'll be right back. Rick, recently there was a movie on TV about two lesbians, and the mother of one of the lesbians, when she found out that her daughter was a lesbian, slapped her across the face. What was your reaction? What happened when you told your mother?
Well, first let me address the movie. I think that reaction of a parent is quite typical. Immediate fear and a violent reaction. Many times parents react very violently and then come to get to know the person that they thought they knew and change that reaction to their child as being gay. My mother and I have a very special relationship. We are treating each other more as adults and have been for a long time. One of the very first things she said to me when I told her that I was gay, she said, "Promise me one thing." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Promise me that you won't molest little boys." This really took me back because this woman and I had been friends. She had raised me. She knew what kind of person I was. And yet once I labeled myself as gay or homosexual, immediately she became flooded with all of the myths and all the stereotypes of what all gay people do, all gay men. And so she immediately assumed that simply because I defined myself as being gay, that I would molest little children. That's an awful myth that is thrown over onto the gay population. In fact, the studies that are being done now of child abuse and of child molestation indicate that by far the majority of child molestations are by a heterosexual male of either a family member or of a close friend, a neighbor, a little neighbor boy or something like that. So that even though that argument has been used to keep gay people down in many places, with further study into the incidence of child molestation, that will be, I think, changed.
A comment that people used to make to you frequently before you announced you were gay was that you should go into work with children because you were so good with them.
Right. I really enjoy children, and I think I would have made an excellent elementary school teacher. Back when I was going through high school, there was the movement to get more men in the elementary schools, and I was urged by everyone in my community to go into elementary school teaching. Interestingly enough, the day after I told my mother that I was gay, for some reason no one ever mentioned that I should go into teaching children again. And it was, I think, a good deal of their fear, which just denied my ability to work with children.
One of the other things the mother in the movie said was, what kind of mother raises a pervert for a daughter? And then they alluded to the fact that, do you know what the Bible says about homosexuality?
I think parents are very quick to take on a lot of guilt that they don't need to take on. I think our culture, of course, expects them to do that, expects them to fail when in having raised a gay child. And that's a real hard place to get parents out of. And as far as the Bible is concerned, certainly there are things in the Bible against homosexuality. But we need to take a real strong look at biblical passages, what passages were culturally defined of the time that they were written. And I think we need to open ourselves up religiously to the idea of continual revelation. I don't conceive God as having existed at one time 2,000 years ago and is not working at all today. And I think that God has much to say to us and might just change a lot of the things that were culturally written back then.
We'll be right back. Rick, do you think that a homosexual parent can be a good parent?
Definitely. There are many gay parents, and that is one myth that we hold about gay people, is that they don't raise children and don't have children and are not living in families. And that certainly is one of the things that was brought out in the movie that you were speaking of, was that simply because of one's sexuality, one cannot be a bad parent. One cannot be a good parent, excuse me. And I don't think that gay people or non-gay people hold any special capacity to be a good or a bad parent. There are gay parents, there are gay children. Gay children are raised by heterosexual parents. I certainly was. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that heterosexual children can be raised by gay parents.
Well, there are two schools of thought there. One says that that a gay parent will not provide the love, warmth, food, security. But then the second fear is that if the parent is gay, then that's the only role model for the child, and therefore the child will grow up gay.
No, I don't see that. Certainly the idea of a role model, I think that we're seeing a change in the American family anyway, in the role models that the man and the woman in a heterosexual relationship present to their children. I think that that's a freeing movement in this country, but I don't see that as affecting sexuality. Perhaps the way one approaches a relationship, but not sexuality itself.
What is homophobia?
Well, that's a term that has recently been created by the American Psychological Association, I believe. Fear of anything homosexual, often accompanied by violence. That fear just reaches so far down into someone's gut and pulls up all of these myths and these fears that people react very hostilely. And it takes quite a bit of work to work through some of that. And of course, gay people experience that themselves, fear of their own homosexuality.
One quick last question. Do gay men hate women?
No, I don't think so. And I think that certainly some gay men hate women. But you can't possibly say that across the board. One of my major joys was finding out that there were lesbian women and I could be friends with women.
Thank you so much. Rick Wilson, we've been talking about Rick's personal experiences being a homosexual. Thank you for being with us on Talk It Over.
You've been watching Talk It Over with your host, Ellen Adelstein. Join us every week at this same time for Talk It Over here on Channel 11. The preceding program was pre-recorded.